Ayatollah Ali Khamenei held the ultimate religious and political authority over Iranians, with the final say over every aspect of their daily lives. Appointed for life, he led by divine right. To the end, chants of death to the dictator, a frequent refrain for protesters brave enough to object to his totalitarian control, with some demonstrators burning his image. But security services, loyal to the Ayatollah, were never far away to crack down on dissent. Disputed presidential elections in 2009 provoked a period of instability that undermined his authority. Street protests erupted, turning deadly, with authorities using brutal force to stay in power for decades on end. Internationally, Khamenei viewed the West, and in particular the United States, with great contempt, even paranoia. But it was the conflict with Israel that best defined the last years of his rule. In 2024, it was the Ayatollah who oversaw Iran's first direct attack in history on its archenemy. He said Iran had demonstrated its power after unleashing hundreds of missiles and drones in retaliation against an Israeli strike on its embassy compound in Syria. He vowed to destroy Israel, and he failed. Months later, in the summer of 2025, Israel launched a massive assault on Iran, initially assassinating top military and nuclear figures. Iran hit back before the U.S. struck top-secret nuclear sites. The 12-day war didn't just damage Iran and show its inability to defend itself, it also damaged Khamenei's reputation. For once, he seemed to have no answer. Khamenei supported Hamas's October the 7th attacks. He spent decades cultivating Iran's proxies, funding the likes of Hamas in Gaza, Lebanese Hezbollah, and the Houthis in Yemen, each of them provoking Israel into military action. The 2025 war was based on limiting the country's nuclear power, a long-running ambition of Khamenei, and a chronic source of fear and anger for the wider world, especially Israel and the United States. He signed a deal in 2015 to limit Iran's nuclear activities in return for trade restrictions being lifted. But the Ayatollah's hostility towards the United States remained. Sanctions were lifted, but Iranians saw no real improvement, taking to the streets with personal grievance. Down with the dictator, death to Khamenei, they shouted. The Ayatollah was quick to blame enemies in the West for the unrest. Then President Trump pulled out of the deal, and it ultimately fell apart, leaving Iran's economy isolated and the supreme leader furious.
Trump will die and his body will turn into ashes and food for worms and ants, but the Islamic Republic will continue to stand.
Anger over Iran's ailing economy saw more clamour for regime change and yet more violence. The Ayatollah personally calling for demonstrators to be crushed. Nationwide demonstrations late in 2022 over Mahsa Amini, the young woman who died in police custody after allegedly violating strict dress codes, led to a violent and merciless crackdown. Thousands of people were killed after calling for the Ayatollah to go. Khamenei was utterly defiant as his citizens were killed in the streets.
The enemies thought they could uproot the tree of the Islamic Republic. That small tree has now turned into a massive tree. Anyone who even thinks about uprooting this tree is completely wrong.
Khamenei grew up devout, holding beliefs so strong he was jailed. In his 20s, he joined a religious opposition movement, playing his part in trying to overthrow the monarchy years before Iran's 1979 revolution. He served as president for 2 terms, a ceremonial role, far from the all-powerful position he'd later assume. He wasn't always the first pick to succeed Iran's first supreme leader, Ruhollah Khomeini. Ali Khamenei was initially seen as lacking the religious seniority needed for the role. But after Khamenei's death, Iranians decided to act fast and appointed Ali Khamenei, just 50 years old, with surprising speed. Khamenei's later years of life saw Iran align with Beijing and Moscow, causing trouble behind the scenes in conflict zones around the world. From arming Russia with Iranian-made drones to fire at Ukraine, to supporting insurgent groups across the region. Khamenei's final period in power unfolded amid renewed nationwide protests, with demonstrators taking to the streets over economic hardship, political repression and demands for fundamental change. The unrest, met with a heavy security response and an internet blackout, exposed a deep divide between Iran's clerical rulers and much of its people that will come to define his final years in power and the end of his decades-long rule.